You're listening to The Riff, a podcast by North Point Church. There's a lot more to the Christian journey than what can be presented in a 30-minute time slot from a stage on Sunday morning. Our host and lead pastor, Jeremy Johnson, highlights the vision of North Point Church and the Christian journey through stories, interviews, and unfiltered faith ramblings. We hope the conversations will help you engage in how faith interacts with your life. I think we're ready. Let's go for it.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us on another episode of The Riff. Today, I have a very special guest, Ed Rapp. Ed worked with Caterpillar for 37 years. He was an executive there, and he's going to share with us some lessons learned, some big challenges he's facing, and the life lessons he continues to teach, even in the face of challenges. You're going to see in our show notes some links that I think are going to be helpful for you if you want to help on this journey, explore some more of some life affirmations or even some of the help on this ALS fight that Ed's going to talk about. So I hope you enjoy this. I know you're going to get a lot out of it. Let's go for it. Well, welcome to another episode of The Riff. Today is a day I've been looking forward to because I get to interview someone that I found for the very first time online. I'll share that story in a second. But I emailed someone who motivated me through YouTube, and he graciously agreed to be with us today on this episode of The Riff. And so I want to welcome Ed Rapp. And so Ed, you are coming to us. Are you from Peoria today? Is that where you're at?
No. When I retired just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, two of our three kids live here, all four of our grandsons. So it's a great place to call home.
So grandkids are a magnet, aren't they?
Yeah. I tell people that being a grandparent is the one part of life that's not overrated. Everybody tells you how good it's going to be, and then you get there, and it's actually better. So it's a big part of my therapy.
I'm not in a hurry to get there. I got a couple of college girls, but I saw a grandparent playing with their grandkid the other day, and I thought, for the first time that I noticed, thinking, that's going to be a lot of fun. So
trust me, it's a great part of life's journey.
Well, I'm glad you're with us for this time. Our audience are North Pointers and friends of North Pointers and people who jumped on the wrong website and everything in between. And today, I want to talk to you about a little bit about your journey. I also want to talk about daily declarations. But let me start by just kind of kicking off how I was introduced to you. We have a mutual friend. Travis Lathrop. I know some of our listeners may know Travis. I met him 20 years ago in Seattle. We were in a small group together, and he was shipped out to Seattle working for CAT. And then he moved back to Missouri. He's from Missouri, moved back to Missouri. And I know that's where you guys crossed paths. And I was meeting Travis for breakfast one day, and he says, man, have you ever considered daily declarations? And I was like, yeah, I guess. And but clearly not as much as he had. And so he was telling me about you, and he texted me a YouTube video that you had done. And then a couple months later, we were meeting. He said, "Do you ever watch that video?" And I was like, I didn't yet. And he said, and then he started sharing his daily declarations, and they were powerful. I mean, they were very powerful. And so I was like, I've got to watch this. I watched, it was your retirement speech, and we'll get there, but I watched this and I thought, man, this is so powerful. I wish I'd have heard this a long time ago. And I want our listeners to hear this. And so I'm so thankful. I emailed you and not thinking that I would get anyone to reply, and you were so gracious with your time. So Ed Rapp, thank you very much for joining us today. You've got quite a journey, and that's where I'd like to start. Kind of give us a little of your journey, just kind of the highlights from birth to retirement in working with CAT.
Well, the first thing I'd say is when I received your note and it had the link to Travis, it was an easy decision. Travis and I are colleagues from way back. We've got some very common ground all the way from Faith to Missouri to CAT. And so it was absolutely a pleasure.
Which makes me nervous dropping his name because I never know if that's going to be a good thing. So I'm glad
good thing or bad, that's right. But to give you a high level, I hail from Pilot Grove, Missouri, population 700. I'm one of 7 kids. I have 3 older brothers and 3 younger sisters. And as I always explained to my mom, I am the neglected middle child. And her response was always the same: with 7 kids, you're all neglected, get over it. But the reality of it is, Jeremy, there was no neglect. I mean, a very close-knit family. I mean, in the early days, it was 7 kids in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. But we had a wonderful family, a strong faith. It just couldn't have been a better way to grow up. And when I graduated from Pilot Grove High School, from a class of 30 kids, I went 30 miles down the road to the University of Missouri. And, 4 quick years later, the recruiters, I was a finance major, but didn't have an interest in banking. I was looking more for industry. And Caterpillar came on campus, and there was something about the global nature of their business that attracted me. In fact, in the interview, I asked the guy, is it really possible to experience the globe working for a company like CAD? And his response was, it's a company you can see the world and get paid to do it. And that's exactly what I did for 37 years. I started in Peoria, then San Francisco, then Johannesburg, South Africa, then Geneva, Switzerland, then Raleigh, North Carolina, then Peoria, then Singapore, and in Peoria. And then through that period, climbed to the Caterpillar executive office. I got within 12 months of competing to be the CEO of the company when I was diagnosed with ALS and given 2 to 5 years to live. And, so then I made, the tough choices in life in terms of retirement. And I'm now 6 years post-diagnosis. So I'm on the outside of the, if you would, the prognosis. But, every day is a gift, including a day like today and a discussion like this. So that's a high-level summary of the journey.
Now, how were you able to? I know there's a lot of people who are at some season in their life, as they're listening, trying to balance everything, and obviously family, just by where you're living now, is still such a big value in your life. How are you able to be so successful in business and still have time for family? What were some of the tricks to the trade for that?
For me, balance was always something worth fighting for. I mean, I just didn't want to get through and achieve a lot professionally and sacrifice everything personally. It was just a sacrifice I wasn't willing to make. And I've always broken into kind of 3 basic categories. Number one is you got to plan your personal life with the same rigor and discipline as you do your professional life, or your personal life will suffer. I mean, I'm amazed how people have corporate strategies and action items and values, but don't take the same approach to their personal life. And so we always had a family strategy of who we wanted to be. And we always had the actions like blocking calendars for key dates, vacations, dinner as a family anytime, we could, church on Sundays. So one, you got to plan your personal life. The second one I always believed was efficiency will set you free. It's not, in today's competitive world, it's not about doing less work or less time in the office. It's about doing the work you do more efficiently. And all the way from how you manage technology to emails to how you lead your organization. I always believe that, any organization, there's 3 to 5 things that are going to make the biggest difference. What are they? How do you get the entire organization focused on it? And then how do you drive a culture around cadence and execution? So I was always about being efficient in the way I led. And then the last part of kind of balance for me was I just felt I had to be a corporate athlete. You just can't take on the challenges of the corporate world, international travel, those kinds of things without keeping yourself in shape mentally as well as physically. And so I just always had a good training regimen that, took good care of my health. And I think it helped a lot going into a tough diagnosis like ALS.
Wow. I've never heard the term corporate athlete, but we talk about like a Tom Brady who's able to play way longer than most because he took care of himself, paid more attention. That makes sense.
Well, if you think about it, we ran a global company, and when I went around the globe to engage with employees in India or China or Indonesia or wherever, the last thing they wanted to see was a tired old executive from Peoria. I mean, they wanted you engaged. They wanted you, understanding their business. And if you're going to deal with jet lag and all the other things that come with it, I just think you got to take care of yourself, both physically and mentally. Yeah.
So good. Talk to me about how faith, you grew up where faith was a part of the family. You saw modeled at home in Pilot Grove, but then you get out and you see the world, but faith still became a value. How did faith become so pivotal for you as an adult?
Sometimes people say, when did you find your faith? And I don't have that recollection. It was just something that was built in from the very beginning. But it was just always a part of the fabric of, as a kid, I was a altar boy. I mean, a lot of, I was very comfortable in giving presentations in front of large crowds throughout my entire career. And people used to say, where did you get comfortable doing this? And the response was, doing lectures and readings in the Catholic Church when I was in the 4th and 5th grade. So getting up in front of a crowd was something that I did from the very beginning, heavily based on the faith. And then when you leave home and, go to university then and get a job, it was something I always maintained, church on Sundays. And that turned in from a habit that I did by myself to then with my, wife and then with our kids. And as you know, there's just tons of ways to be involved. We taught Sunday school. I taught this, confirmation class. And faith was just always a part of the fabric of kind of who I was. And it remains that way today.
Wow. So you had been in the company about 37 years. You were president of the resource industries division of CAT. Looking at the next season, and you receive a diagnosis of ALS. Can you walk us through what that was like for you, receiving that?
Yeah, Jeremy. I back to corporate athlete. I was a jogger. My son and I, in December of 2014. In fact, the hill that I was jogging up, I go by almost every day, and my left toe started to catch and almost trip. And I just come off a plane from Singapore, so I figured there was something, a pinched nerve or whatever. But as I went through the Christmas holiday, the problem continued, and then it just got more difficult to jog. And so I started off, with doctors and MRIs and everything else, trying to figure out what was wrong. And then about 9 months into the journey, one of the doctors said, hey, the one thing we haven't tried is neurology. And so he suggested I go to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. I went up there for 3 days of testing. We get to the end, and I knew something was wrong, but I didn't expect, what we got when the head neurologist called us into his office and said, hey, do you know why you're here? And I said, yeah, you're here to help me figure out what's wrong and then get on a path to recovery. And he said, no, I'm here to tell you that, you have ALS. And I can remember the conversation like it was yesterday. And, there was, my wife asked the question, what should we do? And his comment was, you should, go anywhere in the world you've ever really wanted to go, and you should go now. To which I replied, I've already been there. I mean, through my time at CAT, I traveled to more than 100 countries. I was more interested in impact than I was in just personal travel. The other one, I asked him, how do you fight this thing? And, a combination of diet, exercise, whatever. And he said, it just doesn't work that way. He said, you're going to come back about every 3 months. We're going to measure your strength and breathing capacity. And after getting 3 or 4 measures, I'll be able to calculate, kind of how long you're going to live. And he said it'd be, chances are in a window of 2 to 5 years. And I just never bought into that. I think, I don't know if it's time in Asia, but I believe in many of the principles of Chinese medicine that the body is designed to heal itself. when it's given, the right conditions. And so, I continue to fight it each and every day. But it didn't take me long to process the reality of the diagnosis. I mean, I knew I had to retire from CAT because you can't compete to be CEO with an ALS type diagnosis. I knew we wanted to be open with the employees as to why I was stepping down, because transparency was part of who I wanted to be. And then I knew we had an obligation to try to make a difference in the broader efforts of, making a difference in what is a tough disease. Yeah.
Wow. Now, we're going to drop in our show notes a few different links. One of those links we're going to drop is retirement speech. That was so powerful as you share your journey candidly as you transition from CAT to the next season of your life. And you start talking about daily declarations and in the conviction of your declarations, the power, the life that comes out of those just gripped me. Could you take some moments and walk through to us from a baseline of maybe we've never heard about daily declarations? What are they? How you do them and why they're important?
Well, the greatest gift God gave us was the mind. And I remain, amazed how few people really exercise it for the good of creating positive change. But, we're all products of the environment that we've been raised in. And as we go through life experiences, over time, those experiences get translated from the conscious level to the subconscious level. Many of the things that we do on a daily basis, we simply do out of habit. We don't have to think about it. And the one thing that's clear to me, that if you want to change, you've got to bring those habits back to the conscious level to create that change. And that's what declarations, I actually call them affirmations, do. So if somebody tells me, I want to stop smoking, I'm sorry, that isn't going to get it done. I think there's a very dedicated process. You have to clearly identify what your objective is and why. You've got to clearly outline the action items that will get you there. You have to clearly measure, are you implementing those actions or not? And then you have to affirm to those, each and every day. And when you do affirmations, you always talk about the future state. For example, I was diagnosed on November 5th and rewrote my affirmations on November 7th. And so, for example, if you look at, I am the exception. I outlive my parents and my in-laws. I grow old with Anne. I enjoy the amazing gifts of quality time with our kids and grandkids. I teach my grandsons to play golf, and I walk the course the first time Cole beats Jay. Cole's one of our grandsons. Jay is our son. And I affirm to that each and every day as if it has occurred. And
saying it out loud, like
saying it out loud
vocally.
The other power of affirmations, like I said, if you go through that process, what do you want to achieve? What are the action items? How do you measure success on a calendar, on an app? And how do you affirm to it? When you affirm, the more vivid your picture in your mind of you being successful, the stronger the pull. Because what you're doing is you're bringing that to the conscious level. You do it for 30 days, it becomes a habit, and it becomes a new way, of living. And I used it for the last 25 years of my career. And it was a big part of your question earlier. I always affirmed that I had balance in my life and what that meant and what that looked like. And then if I was out of whack, if I wasn't maintaining that balance, then my subconscious was telling me, hey, wait a minute, this is not who you are. And it's just the only way to create positive change.
So what would you recommend for someone who's listening and thinking, okay, this is a way outside of something they've done before, but they're very interested in starting? Is it Do you just write a rough draft, try it out for a little while? Do you edit it? How do you go about before you get confident to be able to speak it over your life?
Yeah, I think first of all, if you go on staystrongversusals.com, there's a balance section, and in there it has kind of a guide to affirmations, so it gives you some of the theory behind it, because you'll need that help. The thing I always advise people, though, is start small. A lot of times people jump into this and say, I want to change everything, and it becomes so overwhelming they change nothing. And so I always recommend I take it for a test drive. Pick out one part of your behavior, diet, exercise, dinner as a family, church every Sunday. Pick out one thing that you want to change and make a habit, and then use the process, clear articulation of what you want. What are the actions required to do it? How are you going to measure your success? And then how do you write your affirmations supporting it? And you just do that for 30 days, and I'm telling you, it'll turn into a habit. But start small. Don't think you can change the world or change yourself with one exercise. Start small.
Now, your website, which again we have linked here on our show notes, but it kind of talks about the journey of this fight versus ALS. Can you tell us a little bit about an update for those who might not be very familiar? How is the medical community? How is the ability to have healthy community with ALS? What can we do to help?
Jeremy, first of all, you got to understand this is the last frontier in terms of health. There's still challenges, but we've made huge gains in cancer, huge gains in heart disease. But it's really in the area of neurology, all the way from ALS to Alzheimer's to Parkinson's to MS. There really haven't been the type of breakthroughs. And it's because it's just a tougher nut to crack. If someone gets cancer, the first thing you do is take a biopsy. From the biopsy, you understand the type of cancer. From that, you determine the treatment. Well, you can't biopsy, the brain or the spinal cord. And so it's just harder in terms of figuring out the root cause. And so, I work with an amazing group of research scientists and neurologists who are just trying to take a different approach. If you look at the last 200 drug trials in the world of ALS, only 2 have been FDA approved, and they only extend life 3 to 5 months. There's not a clear indication that we need to do things differently. And out of that was born a project called Answer ALS. I'm a patient. I provide funding for the project, and I now lead the advisory board. We're taking 1,000 patients, 200 controls, and for each of those, we have all their clinical data, the genome sequence. From my blood and other patients, they can recreate our motor neuron. And then from that, we can do a lot of analytics of the omics, proteomics, epigenomics, transcriptomics. We're taking all of that, loading it onto one database and portal, and then we're making it available to the world of researchers for free. And so total project's going to cost about $45 million to complete. We've already raised over $44.5 million. And there's about 150 projects in progress right now utilizing that data set. So
did you say you've already raised together over $44 million for this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, wow. Right. And all patient-led, people directly impacted by the disease, leveraging their families, their net worths, their network, their companies. And so we've collectively pulled together. And so I'm convinced it is the wave of how you get to discovery in neurology. Because the mouse model just has not translated into meaningful medicine when it comes to neurology. So the definition of insanity, and so we're just not going down the same path. We're trying something new. So the good thing for me is, it gives me real purpose And, ALS is a tough diagnosis, tough disease. But, I remind people on a regular basis, none of us, stay on earth forever. I mean, we don't get out of this thing alive. And when we get to that transition point, we're going to get measured by the contributions that we make. And at the end of the day, I'm looking for a passing grade. No.
So did you allow yourself any length of time for a pity party?
It's funny. I really didn't go there. The most emotional time for me was telling our kids and parents. And then the other part was actually when I had to sit down and write a letter of resignation. I loved everything about my career at CAT and the people. But I'm telling you, beyond that, I just kind of got on with it. I remember a good friend, maybe 6 months after diagnosis, telling me, Ed, I don't think you're processing it. You haven't gone through, the different stages of, grief and anger and all the other things. I really think you ought to see a psychologist. And I said, I see one daily. I pray to him in the morning. I pray to him at night. He listens intently and he gives me strength. And I think the message I often give people, if you really think about it, everybody that you come across in life, in some way, some shape, some form, has had to deal with adversity. And the thing that I remind people is the time to start preparing for that adversity or the curveball of life is not when it's leaving the pitcher's hand. It's how you live and lead every day. And you do that. Then when that adversity does strike, you're going to be much better situated to take it on.
Wow. Ed, a couple of questions here just with our remaining time are there a couple business mentors or books that you read that shaped you that you would recommend to someone out there?
Yeah, I mean, I've had, so many mentors, that have helped guide me on the book side. My favorites would be Good to Great by Collins, because I think it really talks about the type of leader I always aspired to be. There's a great book by Joe Shallak and Scott Gillis on beliefs, behaviors, and results, and it embodies a lot of how I think about how you run a company. On the corporate athlete side, Younger Next Year by Crowley is a great read about how do you maintain physical capability, well past, the midpoint of life. But those are some that would stick out to me. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And one of my favorite lines from the book is choice, the last of the human freedoms. And the message that each of us have a choice each and every day in terms of attitude, approach, or the choices we make with what we do with the time we have.
Now, you've written a couple books, one that's already out. It's called Measure Twice, Cut Once, or you cut twice and cuss 3 times.
No,
it's measure twice, cut once.
That's right.
And we'll have that linked there, but you can get that wherever books are sold, I would imagine.
It's primarily Caterpillar lessons learned. As a leader, I always felt we had 2, primary responsibilities: leave the place better than you found it, and in more capable hands. And, that's the only way companies sustain over the long haul. So my last official act at the company was Measure Twice, Cut Once, which are 50 lessons learned from my journey with Caterpillar. And then I've got a book in editing right now. It's called Flywheel of Leadership and Life. And it'll be out sometime early next year, and promises to be a worst case scenario, a good sleep aid or doorstop. But at least I wanted to do something during the pandemic that was very constructive, and so I just wanted to get my thoughts, down in writing.
You have led at every stage of your life, and this is no exception. And those who want to help with this fight, the website again for them to go on and maybe make a donation or to get more information. The website will be on our show links, show notes. But for those who are listening, that website is...
Well, you got two, I would suggest. StayStrongVersusALS.com. That's the efforts that I've got. But another, AnswerALS.org. The vast majority of the time I spend is focused on Answer ALS. And it's such a great program. You got 8 leading institutions, 24 research centers, all collaborating to try to bring, to an end, a disease that those that have gone before us have not been able to tackle. So a couple places to get involved, or just get involved in your local community, your local ALS association. They help patients and caregivers on a local level. I think the reality is just don't sit on the sideline, get engaged.
It says in Scripture that our words can either be life or death. And I love that you're giving us a template to be able to speak that life over our own lives and the impact we have on others. So thank you so much for what you're doing, what you continue to do, and for your time with us today. It's been life-giving. I know not only for me, but for those who are joining us today. And we pray God's best blessings on you and your family. And thank you for spending the time with us.
Well, but Jeremy, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're given a vehicle by which people can perhaps pass on, words of wisdom or experience. And so, thanks for being the channel that makes this possible.
Absolutely. Well, Ed, we appreciate this time. As an organization, we want to make a donation today and encourage our listeners to as well. And let's move that needle. And so, Ed, thank you for your time. I know that lives will be impacted, and blessings on you. And thanks for listening to another episode of The Riff. All right. I think we'll be able to post-produce, but man, this has been good. I'm trying to, like you said, a couple of things in there early that I'm like, oh man, my mind started going into that could change the way I lead right there.
There's
and
no doubt.
I started thinking through some applications. There's so many different nuggets there. What a gift this was.
The book is really broken into 4 sections. First of all, around leadership, I always say it's kind of based on the principles of, number 1, balance. If you can't lead yourself, you can't lead others.
Yeah.
And so I talk about many elements of balance that you ask about. The second part is heavily focused on relationships. And Travis is a good example. I mean, we were at very different levels, but we built a great relationship. And my belief is that as a leader, you have to have relationships at all levels of the company, or else you'll succumb to one of the greatest risks in leadership. And that's all the filters that exist between you and the truth. And when you have relationships at all levels, you get the unfiltered truth. And then the last one is, I just think you have to have a disciplined operating model. And it's how you run a business. And then I tie it together to say, if you want to change in any of those areas, then you got to deploy, the use of goals, actions, measures, and affirmations. Because if you don't, you'll continue to lead like you've always led. So, that's kind of the outline of, just what's worked for me. And, and as I said in the presentation you watched, if it positively impacts one person, it'll be worth the effort.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what I just pray that God uses this platform that you have here. I mean, you're pointing your arrows out even every day after retirement in this new season. And I know you're making a big impact. Thank you.
We're pushing. All right.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Man, I owe Travis greatly for his gift of sharing his relationship with you as well. So thank you.
No, you just give him my best regards when you see him, okay?
I will, for sure. Thanks, Ed. Bye.
All right, take care. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Riff. Submit a question for the podcast at northpointchurch.tv/podcast. We'll have a brand new episode every week, wherever you find podcasts.